The crystal chandeliers of the Charleston Historic Estate cast a golden glow over 200 guests. Laughter echoed off the marble walls. Silverware clinked against fine china. It was supposed to be the perfect reception. Then, my eyes locked onto the head table. Two VIP chairs sat completely empty. My parents were missing. I gripped the heavy silk of my wedding dress and pushed past the crowd of wealthy strangers. I scoured the terrace, the lobby, the garden. Nothing. I turned toward the back of the ballroom. Near the swinging doors of the catering kitchen, a cheap wooden folding screen blocked the path to the dishwashing station. I stepped around it. There they were. My mother and father sat huddled at a tiny, wobbly table directly in the path of waiters carrying dirty plates. My dad's hands, calloused and deeply scarred from 30 years of running a small-town auto shop, gripped a paper menu. Those same rough hands had counted out $85,000 in hard cash to pay for every single flower, steak, and champagne flute in this grand estate. Now, they were shoved behind a screen, breathing in the smell of industrial dish soap, while my new in-laws' friends feasted on their life savings. My chest tightened. The air vanished from my lungs. My heels clicked against the polished hardwood as I closed the distance to that cheap wooden screen. The closer I got, the stronger the scent of industrial bleach and garbage bins became. My father, Marcus, was staring intently at a water stain on the folding table. My mother, Vanessa, patted his calloused hand. They were trying so hard to be invisible. Before I could reach out to touch my father's shoulder, a sharp, familiar voice cut through the clatter of silverware. "It is just better this way. Patricia, my new mother-in-law." She stood a few feet away, adjusting the waist of her designer gown, speaking to one of her country club friends. She waved a manicured hand dismissively toward the kitchen doors. "My guests do not need to look at people with greasy fingernails while they eat their filet mignon. It ruins the entire aesthetic." The blood pounded against my ribs. I stepped out from behind the pillar, fully intending to drag her outside. Then, the chandelier light caught something resting against her collarbone, a deep, blood-red stone, wrapped in antique gold filigree. My chest went completely tight. It was my grandmother's ruby necklace, the heirloom my father had kept locked in a safe for 15 years. He had polished it just yesterday. He was supposed to clasp it around my neck during the father-daughter dance tonight. Patricia had it on. She was parading around the ballroom wearing my family's history like a costume prop. I stepped right into her line of sight. Her smug smile faltered for half a second. "Take that off." My voice came out dangerously steady. Patricia reached up, her fingers grazing the ruby. She offered a dismissive little shrug. "Oh, calm down. It matches my dress much better than yours anyway. And your parents are perfectly fine back here out of the spotlight." A heavy hand clamped down on my forearm. Travis, my groom. His face was flushed red, his grip tight enough to bruise. "Willow, stop," he hissed, leaning in close. "It is just a table. It is just a piece of jewelry. Do not make a scene and ruin my mother's special night in front of everyone. My name is Willow. I am 29 years old, and I run a regional shipping warehouse. I manage logistics. I spot discrepancies. When a pallet is missing or the numbers do not add up, I trace the error until I find the leak." For 3 years. I looked at Travis and saw a broken man. I convinced myself he was a victim of his mother's suffocating, narcissistic control. I thought my love was the life raft that would finally pull him away from her toxicity. I thought I was saving him. I stared at his fingers digging into my white lace sleeve. I looked up into his panicked, cowardly eyes. The math finally added up. Travis was not a victim. He was a willing accomplice. He was a shield. perfectly content to sacrifice my parents' dignity to keep his mother comfortable. The chain of guilt and pity that had kept me tied to him snapped in a single heartbeat. I squared my shoulders. I forced my breathing to slow down. I reached over, peeled his fingers off my arm one by one, and dropped his hand. "Okay," I said, my tone colder than the ice in his mother's drink. I won't make a scene in the hall." I left Travis standing by the folding screen. My heels hit the floorboards in a steady, even rhythm. One step, two. The frantic jazz music from the main ballroom grew louder. At the regional shipping warehouse, I track missing inventory for a living. When a 50-ton shipment goes unaccounted for, I do not panic. I pull the manifests. I check the timestamps. I follow the paper trail until the discrepancy exposes itself. My brain operates on numbers, supply chains, and hard evidence. Right now, my entire life was the missing inventory. The puzzle pieces began slamming together. Last Tuesday, Travis sat in my parents' cramped living room. He held a cracked mug of my mother's cheap coffee and looked my father dead in the eye. He begged for an emergency advance on the venue deposit, $25,000. He claimed the historic estate required a massive upfront payment to secure the final catering permits and avoid a total cancellation of the wedding. My father, a man who worked 12-hour shifts under broken cars, did not hesitate. He walked into the bank, drained his emergency retirement fund, and handed over $25,000. Travis brought back a printed receipt the very next morning. The image of that piece of paper burned into my mind. I pictured it sitting on my father's grease-stained kitchen table. Blue ink, a watermark in the top right corner, the logo of Coastal Fidelity Bank, two overlapping sales. My warehouse uses Coastal Fidelity for our payroll accounts. They rebranded 4 years ago. They dropped the sales and switched to a solid blue crest. I watched the maintenance crew scrape the old logo off the glass doors of our local branch myself. That receipt was a fake. Travis printed a useless template off the internet. The estate never asked for a deposit advance. Every single contract for this venue was strictly in my father's name. If there was a billing issue, the estate manager would have called Marcus directly. The $25,000 never went to the venue. I looked across the glittering room at Patricia. She was holding a crystal champagne flute, laughing loudly with a woman in a sequined dress. Patricia's gown was custom silk. Her shoes were imported. Just last month, she complained endlessly about the crushing weight of her massive credit card debt. She claimed she was drowning in interest rates. Tonight, she looked like a billionaire. The math was brutally simple. Travis stole my parents' retirement money to pay off his mother's shopping debt. He financed her fake high society lifestyle with the blood and sweat of my father's labor. And his reward for this grand theft was a front-row seat at my wedding, while the people who funded the entire charade were banished to the dishwashing station. The heat in my face completely vanished. Cold, absolute clarity settled into my bones. Travis jogged up behind me, panting slightly. He reached out, his mouth open to offer some empty compromise. I sidestepped his outstretched hand, brushing past his shoulder like he was a ghost. I walked straight through the center of the dance floor. The heavy tulle of my wedding dress swept across the polished wood. I kept my eyes locked on the far corner of the room, the DJ booth. The DJ looked up from his mixing board, his brow furrowed in confusion. I reached across his table and pulled the cordless microphone right out of his hand. My thumb flicked the power switch. I tapped the steel mesh twice. The sharp, heavy thud echoed through the towering ballroom. The jazz music died instantly. 200 heads snapped toward the stage. The clatter of forks against china stopped. The silence in the room became absolute, a suffocating vacuum waiting to be filled. Down near the front, Patricia stood clutching her crystal flute. A tight, expectant smile stretched across her face. She adjusted her posture, ready for a sweet, weeping bridal toast honoring her family. Travis was jogging toward her, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically toward me. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the speakers. Low, steady, and completely devoid of warmth. Good evening, everyone. I want to take a brief moment to talk about generosity, sacrifice, and the true cost of tonight's celebration. You are all eating a beautiful 5-course meal. You are drinking imported champagne. We are standing in a historic, luxury estate. I paused. I let the silence stretch for 3 agonizing seconds. Every single detail in this room cost exactly $85,000. And it was paid for entirely in cash by my father, a man who spent 30 years working under cars in a small-town auto shop. A soft murmur rippled through the back rows. Patricia's tight smile cracked. Her posture stiffened. My parents, Marcus and Vanessa, gave their entire life savings so we could all be here tonight. I pointed a rigid finger straight toward the back of the ballroom, directly at the cheap wooden folding screen by the catering kitchen. Yet, my new mother-in-law banished them behind that screen next to the dishwashers, telling her son that my father's calloused hands would ruin the aesthetic of her party. The collective gasp from the crowd hit the air like a physical wave. 200 people whipped their heads around, staring past the elegant tables toward the kitchen doors. My parents sat frozen behind the wooden partition. Patricia's face drained of color. Her jaw dropped. The wealthy woman in the sequined dress standing next to her actually took a physical step backward, her eyes wide with sudden disgust. I stepped off the edge of the stage, closing the distance to the main floor. I locked my eyes entirely on Patricia. Patricia, take off the necklace. The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Patricia's hand flew to her throat, her fingers wrapping protectively around the ruby. She shook her head, a frantic, pathetic little jerk. Sweat beaded at her hairline. Take it off. I repeated into the microphone. That ruby belongs to my grandmother. My father polished it yesterday. You took it from the bridal suite so you could play dress up in front of your country club friends. Hand it over. Now. The murmurs erupted into loud, outraged whispers. Her friends stared at her, their expressions twisting into open contempt. Patricia's hands trembled violently. She fumbled with the gold clasp at the back of her neck. The heavy ruby dropped into her palm. She held it out. A bridesmaid quickly snatched it from her shaking fingers. Travis finally reached his mother's side. He opened his mouth. His face twisted in absolute panic, desperate to stop the bleeding. I cut him off. I saved the killing blow for him. But a stolen necklace is just an accessory. Travis. I stared straight into my groom's terrified eyes. Last week, you begged my father for a $25,000 cash advance for a venue deposit. You handed him a Coastal Fidelity receipt. You used their old logo, the one they retired 4 years ago. Travis froze. His breath hitched loudly. The blood completely vanished from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. This venue never asked for a deposit, I said, projecting every syllable into the silent room. You stole my parents' retirement money to secretly pay off your mother's designer credit card debt. The ballroom exploded. Patricia snatched a gold-plated phone from her clutch. Her fingers shook violently as she punched in 911. She pressed the speaker to her ear and began shrieking into the receiver. She claimed a deranged bride was physically assaulting her and stealing priceless family heirlooms. Travis crossed his arms. A smug, sickening little smirk crept back onto his face. He thought he had me cornered. He thought the threat of police would force me back into quiet submission. 2 patrol officers walked through the heavy oak ballroom doors. Their boots echoed sharply against the hardwood. The music was still completely dead. The wealthy crowd parted like water. The taller officer stepped up to the edge of the dance floor, resting his hand casually on his duty belt. He opened his mouth to ask who was running the event. I unlatched my purse. I pulled out a folded manila envelope. My father, Marcus, is the sole legal renter of this property, I said. I handed the officer a crisp, 5-page venue contract. It bore my father's ink signature and social security number at the bottom of every single page. Next, I handed him a faded, dog-eared Polaroid. It was a picture of my grandmother from 30 years ago. The exact same ruby necklace rested squarely against her collarbone. The officer stared at the photograph. He flipped through the contract. He handed both back to me. He turned on his heel, completely ignoring Travis, and walked straight up to Patricia. "Ma'am, you are trespassing on a privately rented estate," the officer said, his voice flat and unamused. "You need to vacate the premises immediately, or you will be placed in handcuffs." Patricia's jaw snapped shut. Her face turned the color of wet ash. Travis dropped his arms, stepping back in pure, unfiltered terror. The officers flanked them instantly. They marched my ex-groom and his mother straight down the center aisle, past the horrified stares of their elite friends, and out the front doors. The heavy wood slammed shut behind them. 6 months passed. The cell phone footage of their public eviction spread rapidly through Charleston. It landed directly in the email inbox of the executives at Travis's finance firm. They fired him for corporate fraud the following Monday. Patricia's country club friends blacklisted her entirely. She was forced to liquidate her entire closet of imported designer bags just to pay back the stolen $25,000 and avoid a grand theft indictment. I never looked back. Since the reception ended before dinner, the venue and caterer issued a massive partial refund. We took that cash, packed our bags, and flew across the Atlantic. Right now, my father, my mother, and I are sitting on a sunlit terrace in Tuscany, sipping wine that tastes nothing like revenge and everything like freedom. The gavel struck the heavy wooden block in the Charleston County Courthouse, sealing the absolute end of their illusion. It took exactly 4 months for the legal system to untangle the $25,000 theft. The state prosecutor charged Travis with felony wire fraud and grand larceny. He pleaded guilty to avoid a federal trial. The judge sentenced him to 5 years of strict probation, 500 hours of community service, and ordered immediate financial restitution of $28,500, accounting for legal fees and interest. The fallout was swift and absolute. His career in wealth management evaporated overnight. The state compliance board permanently revoked his trading licenses. He was blacklisted across the entire financial sector. Patricia faced her own ruthless reckoning. The country club board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to strip her membership. She became a social pariah within hours. The elite women who used to drink her imported champagne now crossed the street to avoid her. To keep herself and her son out of a state penitentiary, she was forced to liquidate her entire fake lifestyle. The custom silk gowns, the imported leather shoes, the diamond tennis bracelets, and the antique vases were all seized and auctioned off to the highest bidder. The proceeds were wired directly into my father's retirement account. 8 months passed. The bitter winter chill melted into a warm, humid South Carolina spring. I was sitting at my kitchen island on a Tuesday evening, reviewing a stack of quarterly logistics reports for the warehouse, when my cell phone vibrated against the marble counter. An unknown local number flashed on the screen. A voicemail notification popped up a moment later. I tapped the speaker icon. Travis's voice filled the quiet kitchen. It was thin, desperate, and entirely stripped of that arrogant edge he used to carry. He rambled for 3 solid minutes. He talked about how much he missed my cooking. He blamed his mother for the entire wedding disaster. He used heavy, manipulative words like forgiveness, grace, and second chances. "I was just so pressured," he whispered into the receiver. "I was trying to keep the peace. I am still the man you fell in love with. Willow, please, just call me back." I listened to the entire recording. My pulse remained perfectly steady. My chest rose and fell in a calm, even rhythm. My hands stayed completely relaxed, resting on the countertop. Cool. Heavy indifference washed over me. I pressed the delete button. I blocked the number permanently. I picked up my red pen and went back to checking my shipping manifests. That weekend, I drove out to my parents' house. We had just returned from a 3-week vacation across Italy and France, completely funded by the massive venue refund. My father's auto shop was closed for the Sunday holiday. The faint, comforting smell of motor oil and charcoal smoke hung in the warm air. My father stood at the rusted backyard grill, flipping steaks with those same rough, calloused hands. My mother sat at the picnic table, laughing loudly as she poured iced tea for my warehouse floor manager, Brenda, and a few of my closest friends. These were real, genuine people. They wore faded denim and heavy work boots. They cared absolutely nothing about the thread count of the napkins or the aesthetic of the patio furniture. They cared about loyalty. My father caught my eye across the yard. He smiled, pointing a pair of metal tongs in my direction, offering me the first plate. I took it. The food tasted incredible. The air felt incredibly light. My shoulders dropped, releasing a tension I had carried for 3 entire years. This was true wealth. This was my chosen family. Narcissists build their entire reality on a foundation of superiority. When you expose the cracks in their foundation, they do not reflect. They panic. They lash out. They try to convince the world that you are the villain for turning on the lights. People like Patricia and Travis rely entirely on your silence. They thrive on the illusion that keeping the peace is always more important than protecting your own dignity. They expect you to swallow their disrespect because they mistake your patience for weakness. They assume you will always shrink yourself to fit into their grand picture. But trauma is a brutally effective teacher. I walked away from that historic estate with 3 unbreakable rules. Rule number 1. Never finance someone else's ego. If someone needs your money, your silence, or your humiliation to feel powerful, they do not love you. They are simply using you as a mirror to admire themselves. Rule number 2. A title does not excuse abuse. It does not matter if they are a mother-in-law, a groom, or a blood relative. Disrespect is disrespect. You owe absolutely nothing to the people who push your loved ones into the shadows. Rule number 3. True class is defined by loyalty, not zip codes. Real class is a father emptying his life savings to see his daughter smile. Real class is standing up for the people who loved you first, no matter the audience. If you are sitting right now in a toxic relationship, wondering if you should keep biting your tongue to keep the peace, I want you to ask yourself one question. What is the actual cost of your dignity? Because I promise you, whatever price they are making you pay, it is far too high. Stop apologizing. Grab the microphone. Tell the absolute truth. If this story struck a nerve, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel. Share this video with someone who needs the courage to walk away. Drop a comment below and tell me about the moment you finally drew your line in the sand. I am Willow, and I am completely free.